So my name is Charles Henderson. Some of you may know who I am. Many of you might be asking who the hell I am. I figure I'll explain with pictures. This is sort of, I guess, my vision cloud of how I envision my life. And you see me as a public speaker. Here I am after a TV appearance that we filmed down here, been on TV a bunch of times, had my license plate taken away by the state of Texas because it endorsed illegal activity, and then got in a Twitter fight with our governor, which was, back when it was named Twitter. You're not supposed to give monkeys beer in Japan. They get really angry when you do that. Speaking, I keynoted South by Southwest, got to be on stage with President Obama. That was kind of cool. I play hockey. My kid plays hockey. That's sort of me in a nutshell. And then there's this thing in the middle. That's me in my early 20s. And for the younger people, I see some of you in the audience, these things are called payphones. And they're normally coin-operated, or in this case, they were actually being operated by a Radio Shack pocket dialer with a 6.5536 timing crystal that was swapped in, and then it made sounds that fooled the telco into thinking you were depositing coins in. If people thought it was a quarter tone, it was actually 5 nickel tones, but long story short, you could make free calls. That's what these people are doing. That's from DEFCON 4, 1997 at the Monte Carlo. And I think about things like this a lot when I'm giving talks like this. I think about where I started, when I was dreaming of what I was going to do in my life. And my dream here, when I was at DEFCON, was I was going to be a lawyer. That didn't work out. I didn't really know that I could go into the information security industry when I was right here. None of us did. We were kids who were just happy that we could finally drink in a casino. In the US, that's more of a higher bar because you have to hit 21, which means I guess you have to survive 21 years to do it, at least if you want to do it legally. You can't really see it on this, but I'm actually wearing a Tone Loc shirt under the Tommy Hilfiger shirt there. Tone Loc was a war dialer. For the kids there, somebody will explain it to you later. But the kind of cool thing was, I thought no matter what I did in life, I was going to make this huge difference. And shortly after this picture was taken, my life took a turn and I went into hacking as a career. I went into, red teaming, penetration testing, vulnerability research. I was already what we'll call an independent study at this point in my life. I was maybe experimenting on my own, but I wasn't getting paid for it, right? And when I went into that career, I thought, I'm going to really make a difference in the world. I'm going to find vulnerabilities. I'm going to make people more secure because I'm going to find stuff before criminals do, right? I'm going to discover all the problems in the world and we're going to solve them. And I look back now and realize how naive I was and how we as an industry have kind of failed at making things more secure. And there's this huge, overarching sentiment in information security that things are always getting worse and that they've been getting worse ever since that picture was taken, Nothing is getting better. And it's like this huge cliche that we love to say, and we love to talk about over beers about how things aren't getting better, but we're not really doing anything to change it. And if you're wondering just how bad things have gotten, let's consider a couple of numbers. First, this is the big one that I like to focus on, dwell time, So how long does it take a ransomware gang on average to accomplish their goals? If we'd been talking about this in 2020, we would have said, hey, 2 months, it takes 2 months, a lot of lateral movement, all this stuff. It turns out that criminals have gotten really efficient and they're down to 5 days. And probably most of that is just because they're not in that much of a hurry because our detection and response capabilities are so crappy that they're kind of taking their time and doing it in 5 days. Kind of makes me feel a little bit sad. At the same time, when a company gets breached, it's getting more and more expensive. And a lot of people will say, well, maybe we should lower our hourly rates, but I don't see that one happening. So if you're at $4.5 million for a breach, that seems like a lot of money. But a lot of these enterprise class firms, that's a rounding error. They really don't care. It's easier to spend money on breaches than it is to spend money on security. Because at least if you're spending money on breaches, you only have to pay one provider. It's your DFIR team that comes in. And I've run the DFIR team before. I ran X-Force for about 9 years. And I can tell you, those breaches, they're really expensive, but there's almost like a business as usual mentality when they happen these days. And collectively, when you think about why this is happening, it's because over $1 trillion has been stolen from these victims so far. That's a lot of money. To put that in perspective, advertising as an industry is about to hit $1 trillion in its lifetime. Computer crime has done it in like a decade, 2 decades. That's pretty impressive. If this was an enterprise that you could invest in, I guess you could invest in computer crime. I'm not suggesting you do, but there are certainly Eastern Europeans that do. Was that out loud? Anyway, you can invest in computer crime, I guess, but the stock market would be going crazy on it. Venture capitalists would be lining up to throw money at computer criminals if they could. I mean, you think the competition for fundraising amongst cybersecurity firms is bad? Imagine if it was criminals. So, what does all this mean? It means not only is there a lot of money flowing into these criminal organizations, there's just an absolute ton of data. So, all these records, everything, it's data amassed. And as these folks start amassing this data, really a lot of what we do in this room sort of becomes irrelevant. Bear with me for a second. And I love testing, but do criminals really need to find vulnerabilities to hack in when they can actually just log in? We have made it through our past history. Think about it as our data debt, all the data that's been compromised, that we're looking at a point in which offensive security is really meaningless because the way criminals operate doesn't really align with the way that we operate. Strangely enough, through all of this, the only people that seem to be going to jail, at least in the US, are CISOs. So I'm on the BlackHat review board, and this past year I had the privilege of escorting a CISO into the BlackHat conference, and I noticed that he had some hardware around one of his ankles, and it was an ankle bracelet. And it turns out that that CISO is under indictment in the US for failure to disclose a breach in a timely fashion. What's odd about this is the only person that has been indicted from that breach is actually the CISO. No one that perpetrated the breach, no one that profited from the breach, no one that bought the data from the breach. Meanwhile, we see very, very visual wins by the criminals. They're profiting. Sometimes wide open. And having run a DFIR organization, I can tell you, in many cases, attribution's fairly easy. We know who did this. We can tie it with threat intel. We can say, this person was responsible. In fact, if you look at like the Conti leaks or various leaks of some of these criminal organizations, you find that they operate very much like a business. You have individuals that get put on performance improvement plans. We were discussing this last night, some of the speakers, and it was suggested that probably if you fail a performance improvement plan in organized crime, the exit strategy is a little bit different than, say, Fortune 500. But really, what you're talking about is a very, very well-built enterprise organization dedicated to crime. And what that means is, as they get more efficient, we should be getting more efficient. We should be changing our tactics. And the old school method of finding vulnerabilities and fixing vulnerabilities really isn't working. Neither are really any of our detection and response capabilities. In fact, if you can make an acronym, you can do well in the security community, because your average CISO is drowning in this crap. You know, what other acronyms can I throw at the security problem? And you're going to hear today from technical reasons why certain EDRs suck and certain tools suck. And really, we've put the people that buy from us, the people that use us, the people that trust us to improve their security, we put them in an untenable position. We've put them in a position where they can't win. We've given them the tools to compete in an entirely different sport than they're competing in. You know, we talked about ice hockey. We've trained them to play football, thrown them in an ice rink, and said good luck. So, what's really at the core of that issue? First of all, you know, I mentioned it before, but we have a certain lack of attribution. When we talk about a breach, we talk about some nebulous criminal organization. We're not really getting down to the people that are responsible. And because of that, it keeps on going. No one is really held accountable. Secondarily, victims pay, and when they pay, they finance their next big problem. And also when they pay, they almost guarantee that somebody's going to return and demand more money from them in some sort of extortion racket. Once you establish that you're a willing participant in extortion, you can count on further extortion. And then finally, there's not really consequences for anybody but the CISO in all of this. Security, all of us in this room are seen as a cost center. We don't demonstrate value. And the organizations that suffer repeated breaches after repeated breaches, the only penalties they face are in social media. And we can be a very judgmental group. We love to ridicule Microsoft and others who see a lot of breaches, but the truth of the matter is, no one that actually buys from them cares that they're being breached repeatedly. In the US, we have this phenomenon where you get signed up for credit monitoring every time your data gets breached. I don't know how many credit monitoring subscriptions I have, but I can tell you it's a ton. It's become a normal part of life. We've just accepted that the companies we do business with get breached a lot. And because of that, there's zero incentive for these companies to do better. None. How many people are, say, penetration testers or red teamers in the room? Hold your hands. Keep your hands up. How many of you have found the same result? Keep your hands up. I saw that. How many of you have found the same problem in the same client in consecutive years? Oh, 2 hands there. 3 years. 4 years. So the limit seems to be 3 years. Now, for anyone that thinks that we provide value to the community, think about that for a second. We found a vulnerability, reported the vulnerability, and found it again a year later. In some cases, 2 and 3 years later. We're doing something wrong. I mean, we can say our clients are doing something wrong. They are. But if we don't adapt, we are doing something wrong. We are delivering the message in a manner that is not being utilized. If I speak to someone who doesn't speak English in English, realize that they do not speak English, and continue to speak English at a louder volume, I'm not really doing anything, am I? I'm just yelling. We need to figure out a way to communicate better. My team has a slogan, and it came from a past employee, but it's hack for free, get paid to write the report. And what we're basically saying is, it's not about the things we find, it's about how we convey it. It's about how we get the point across and get, the issue fixed. But it's more than getting the issue fixed, because the average enterprise class firm in the US has about 1.5 million unpatched vulnerabilities at any given time that they know about. The fact that you found 30 or 40 additional vulnerabilities and put them on the pile is kind of meaningless. It is not like criminals are getting bonus points for finding extra flaws. I know it's cool when your report has multiple flaws in it, but criminals really don't care. So, what can we do moving forward? I think, first of all, it's very key that we start to begin to, with our threat intel, actually name names and shame. And I think that we need to graduate from a world in which threat intel is a paid service to a world in which threat intel is a public service. We need to democratize threat intel. And I know this sounds rich from somebody that used to run a threat intel provider, but I really do mean it. And I don't run one anymore, so I couldn't say that. It's no longer against my business interest. Second thing is we need to encourage people to stop paying. I know a lot of governments are getting involved in forbidding paying of ransom because it's gaining ground in the US. But I think it's more an issue of we need to educate people on why paying is bad. I'm not a believer that legislation is ever the answer for any computer security problem, because let's face it, the first time a government writes an information security law that works, I think we'll all throw parades in the streets. I don't have faith in any kind of ransomware bill that has effect. Secondly, ransomware is actually going down. Other forms of extortion are going up. This is going to be whack-a-mole. The criminals have already shown that they can adapt much faster. What we need to do is disincent the business. And finally, we need to start imposing physical consequences on those threat actors. If we know who they are, let's see what we can do. This is something that I feel strongly about, mainly because the US lags so horribly in terms of privacy. But we really need to work on containing this flow of consumer data that is being used to compromise victims. We need to be better about privacy. And I don't mean like privacy mandates where companies have to say what they're doing with the data. I mean, companies are actually responsible for the fact that when your stuff gets breached and it leads to another breach, when it leads to a credential stuffing attack, when all these things happen as a result of their breach, that they face some sort of liability. Not the CISO, but the company. And we need to look at both positive incentives for companies that deploy security and negative disincentives for companies that allow breaches to occur. But there are things that we can do as professionals too. Make sure that that test that you perform or that vulnerability that you find actually gets fixed in the places that you find it. Make sure that you're working with people that actually understand the importance of fixing it. But also, if you start to weave in threat intel to your findings, we always talk about threat-informed testing, but do we really do threat-informed remediation? Where we start telling people, hey, there's a threat actor in your segment who's using this vulnerability right now, it's in their TTP playbook, and you should be fixing this before you fix anything else. That's an easy thing to say to somebody. That kind of priority can go a long way to allowing somebody to make a well thought out, meaningful decision. Finally, as I leave you, and I do have to leave in a hurry today. We've got a family emergency back in the States, so I'll be leaving straight for the airport after this. But look into these eyes, that sullen face. I mean, you don't know how hard it was to keep that sullen face in my early 20s while in Vegas at DEFCON. This is before BlackHat even existed. And I think about all the excitement I had when I entered into the world of vulnerability research and getting paid for it. I remember getting my first paycheck for hacking and thinking, man, this is like getting paid to ride rides at Disney World. It's like the coolest thing ever. I thought it was going to change the world. I thought I was going to tell people meaningful things that, about their problems, and they were going to fix them all, and then we were going to be secure. And it's weird because ever since that moment where I got my first paycheck, I've watched the information security outcomes get worse and worse over time. I think it's not beyond the realm of possibility that we could actually see a rebound at some point, but I think what it takes is a fundamentally different approach on the outcome of offensive security. We can still do the things we love, but we need to think about how we deliver that report. Hack for free, get paid to write the report. Thank you very much. I'm Charles Henderson. Enjoy the conference.